Vacation plans, long commute, weekend at the cabin. Wherever you end up this summer, the Connector Idaho Daily News helps keep you connected to Idaho, even while you're away. Get the top local stories every weekday morning in just a few minutes. That's the Connector Idaho Daily News. Listen on your podcast app.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudet. You're listening to Idaho Matters. It's Friday, which means it's time for our Reporter Roundtable. This is when we get you up to date on the news that made headlines this last week. And today, our panelists include Brian Clark, Idaho Statesman opinion writer, Clark Corbin with the Idaho Capital Sun, and Laura Guido, also with the Idaho Capital Sun. And I want to welcome all of you. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Gemma.
Good to see you. So, Clark, we're going to start with you today because Idaho was once again trying to wipe out an invasive species that could have a really big impact on the Snake River. We're talking about quagga mussels, and they have now been detected near Twin Falls for the fourth year in a row. It seems that state officials say there's also some encouraging news because they're finding fewer of them. Clark, you have been following the state's effort to eradicate these quagga mussels since they were first detected back in 2023. So can we just start with the basics today, Clark? Why are these tiny little mussels considered such a big threat to Idaho?
Yeah, thanks, Gemma, for sure. One of the reasons that the mussels are such a big threat to Idaho is because of how quickly they reproduce and because they form these dense colonies. And to give you an idea, one adult female quagga mussel, after she reproduces, can lay up to 1 million eggs a year. And so state officials and conservationists alike who I've talked to have said the mussels pose a huge threat to the state of Idaho if they spread, if they're allowed to become established. And some of the threats are clogging pipes that are used for drinking water or for irrigation, overwhelming boats and ships. The quagga mussels are also filter feeders, Gemma, and so they actually take out and rob a lot of the nutrients that other aquatic species depend on. And keep in mind, these are a non-native invasive species, and so they're really concerned that if the quagga mussels become established, if they spread, if they develop these dense colonies, that it could really hurt. It could threaten our drinking water system because thousands of users depend on drinking water from the Snake River, including municipal water systems. It could hurt agriculture. It could hurt our tourism and recreation industries. And so one of the things that both state officials and conservationists agree on is that the quagga mussels are a bad deal. They represent a threat to the state of Idaho. And so far, the folks that I've talked to are saying that prevention is the best way to try to fight these quagga mussels. And we can get into a little bit more later about what the state's strategy is to try to eradicate the quagga mussels, Gemma.
So as I mentioned, Clark, I mean, this is now the fourth year in a row that they've been detected. Can you take us back to the summer of 23? What happened when they were first discovered? And I mean, how unusual is Idaho's decision to try to completely eradicate them?
Yeah, sure. It was late summer of 2023. I think it was mid-September, and state officials found microscopic larva form of the mussels. I believe they're called veligers, and state officials were doing water sampling in the Snake River and other bodies of water, kind of monitoring for invasive species, monitoring water quality, and some of these samples in the Snake River, right around the Shoshone Falls area, actually, is where the mussels have been detected in water samples. And so immediately, the Idaho State Department of Agriculture, which is leading the response and the treatment plan for these mussels, and Governor Brad Little put out an announcement. This was the first time in state history that these quagga mussels had been discovered in an Idaho body of water, and they immediately implemented kind of a fast-acting response plan. Even at that time, they were talking about how the mussels can get established quickly, they reproduce rapidly, they can clog drain pipes and threaten infrastructure. And so from the get-go, state officials were very concerned about this. And it is, I've been told that it's unprecedented, Gemma, in terms of the state's response, in terms of trying to detect early and then try to fully eradicate quagga mussels. I don't think it's really been done or been done successfully on a
Hmm.
large moving body of water like the Snake River. And so I've been told that it is pretty unprecedented. And I spoke with some folks from the Idaho Conservation League who said that actually people from all across the country and even across the world are watching Idaho's response to see if it works. A big part of Idaho's response, in addition to the water sampling to identify the quagga mussels, is they're using copper-based treatments in the Snake River. And they started again late this week. And the strategy is to try to kill off and eradicate the quagga mussels. They're saying that it has both reduced the stretch of the river, the actual size of the river that has
Hmm.
been infected, and they're saying they're seeing 77% fewer quagga mussels than this time last year. But we also know that the copper-based chemicals, one of which is called natrix, we also know that that chemical is hazardous to a lot of different aquatic life in the river, not just the mussels. And so, in particular, in 2023, during the first year of the treatment, there were actually 6 or 7 tons of dead fish that floated to the surface of
Right.
the Snake River around Twin Falls as a result of the treatment. And so conservationists and state officials are monitoring copper levels in the water. And that's something that everybody is concerned about. The side effect of trying to kill the mussels is it also is a hazardous chemical to other life in the Snake River, Gemma.
So, Clark, you mentioned that the detections are down by 77% this year and in a smaller area. So, if that's the case, why haven't officials then been able to completely knock these quagga mussels out?
One of the things that officials from the State Department of Agriculture talked about, and they're talking about, I think they found 7 or 8 adult mussels, and they're saying that they were in deeper pools of water and they kind of survived in these little nooks and crannies, these little fissures in the rock about 15 to 25 feet underwater in the Snake River. And so they said that the treatment they say has been effective. It's reduced the number of mussels, but some mussels are able to kind of take what they called safe harbor in these tiny little nooks and crannies. And so one of the strategies this year, Gemma, is the State Department of Agriculture is relying more on scuba divers to go down
Oh.
underwater and to actually map out sections of rock underwater and search inch by inch and foot by foot to see if there are surviving adult mussels in there. But I've been told that it's deeper pools of water. It's kind of complicated areas, and it's these little fissures, these nooks and crannies under the water in rocks is where they've been finding them this year, is what I've been told, Gemma.
So, are state officials hoping that this new approach this year, Clark, as you mentioned, these scuba divers going down and identifying, right, like where these quagga mussels are, maybe in those little fissures and things like that, are they hoping that this is what could potentially eradicate these mussels?
That's what they're hoping for. I haven't been able to have anybody from the state give me a definitive timeline. They do know that monitoring and testing will continue for years. I think there would have to be several
Hmm.
years of sampling and testing and no mussels detected in order for folks to feel confident that they have been eradicated. And so the state officials, yes, they are hopeful. They said they have a plan. They said they're being strategic about it and following science and data. But when I talked to folks at the Idaho Conservation League, they said they're rooting for the state, but they said they don't want to see Idaho get in a situation where they're dumping lethal copper chemicals into the Snake River year after year, ongoing forever. And so that is one of the concerns. Right now, the conservationists that I talk to are saying that eradication prevention is the best strategy, but they are concerned they don't just want to put copper into the
Hmm.
river year after year, knowing that it does kill other aquatic species, and knowing that thousands of people in Idaho depend on drinking water, safe, clean drinking water from the Snake River, Gemma.
So, as you said, Clark, I know you spoke with the folks over at the Idaho Conservation League, and as you
Yeah.
said, they do support this. However, did they talk anything about, is there kind of a breaking point? And what I mean by that, is there a point where the environmental cost of these treatments starts to kind of outweigh the benefit?
Yeah, they said they want to be monitoring the sampling data pretty closely. They're saying basically if the data shows that we're not containing the mussels, if there's more mussels or if they spread, then they said that that should be a wake-up call. One other thing that the conservationists I talked to at Idaho Conservation League, they said that it would be expensive, but they would like the state to think about more of these hot wash decontamination stations at every popular body of water in Idaho. That's one of the ways, Gemma, that these mussels spread is they might be sort of unnoticed in a boat or a kayak or a paddleboard that's brought from an infested body of water like Lake Powell over to Idaho and put in the Snake River. That's one way that the mussels could be spread. And so folks at Idaho Conservation League said we should really think as a state about the cost, and there would be a significant cost of expanding hot wash decontamination to all popular bodies of
Mm-hmm.
water and all boat ramps versus what would the cost be if the mussels become firmly established in the Snake River or Lake Pend Oreille or Lake Coeur d'Alene or any other body of water in Idaho that people depend on for drinking water and
Mm-hmm.
for recreation purposes and agriculture.
So, Clark, if I remember correctly, when this was first spotted, didn't state officials have everyone with boats do that hot water decontamination before they entered the Snake River?
They're doing it at the Snake River around Shoshone Falls, and I think it's called Centennial Park. They
Mm-hmm.
do have a mandatory hot wash and inspection station, and that continues. And there are other hot wash and inspection stations, especially at long highways at state borders. But conservationists would like to see that expanded to all popular bodies of water
Mm.
where people put in, not just the infected area around the Snake River. But you are absolutely right. The hot wash decontamination is a part of the state strategy, and that's ongoing. And they are using that around the affected area, around Twin Falls, around the Twin Falls pool and the Shoshone Falls pool of the Snake River.
So, Clark, before I let you go, as I mentioned, you have
Yeah.
been covering this from the beginning, right? So going on 4 years now. After this latest reporting on this, do you get the sense that state officials genuinely believe that eradication is still achievable, or has the goal shifted to becoming more of we just need to contain these infestations?
Well, the people I talked to, and specifically the spokesperson I talked to at the State Department of Agriculture, talked about full eradication, that was still the strategy this year. They said that Idaho depends on water too much to do anything but full eradication. They're saying whether you're a part of the agriculture community and you depend on irrigation water, or whether you're a member of the public and depend on safe, clean drinking water, they said Idaho depends on water too much to do anything at this point other than full eradication. And I did believe the spokesperson when she told me that. And so that's what I've been told. That's my understanding. But I think that, especially people in the conservation community and members of the public are going to want to keep seeing that water sample data and want to see basically the state proving and showing its work that the treatments are producing results and are effective, and are we moving towards eradication, or if the mussels become established or if they spread, what would that mean for in terms of the strategy and the state's response? And so I think those are questions that members of the public will have, but everything that I've seen and been told is that they're taking it extremely seriously and that the state is still hopeful for full eradication. And it would be a pretty unprecedented move. And so I think it would be a big success if the state is able to achieve that. But right now, they're still working on that goal.
Well, I want to start with you and some reporting you recently did about ICE flights that have been apparently operating out of the Twin Falls Airport for twice a week. And a group of local residents is now watching and they're documenting who is being flown out. So, can you start off by telling us what exactly is happening at the Twin Falls Airport, and why were you able to learn about these flights, Laura?
Yeah, so every Tuesday and Thursday, a flight operated by a private contractor, CSI Aviation, flies into the Twin Falls airport, and then detainees are usually boarded on this plane and flown somewhere else. There's kind of a network that they call it ICE Air operates,
Hmm.
and it's usually where there's hold rooms or detention centers, and they're kind of flown around all throughout the area. But Twin Falls, like in Idaho, is definitely the most active and the most regular for these flights.
And Laura, you spent a time, right, with a group of folks who actually go to the airport, they watch, they record the detainees as they're being put on these planes. Can you tell us anything about who these people are and why they're doing this?
Yeah, most of them are affiliated with a group called Indivisible, which is like a progressive advocacy organization with different local chapters. A couple of them are doing it independently as well. But I went out with them for one of these flights just to watch it and see what was going on. And they got involved through kind of the other branches of this Indivisible group, and then there's other kind of non-affiliated groups that have just started kind of tracking these flights and keeping an eye on them, and they were all kind of able to learn from these other groups about how you go about tracking them and
Mm.
knowing when they're going to come in. And so people can, it's mostly retirees because they can kind of come in at any time in the day, and it's midweek. And so they make sure they watch flight tracking websites,
Hmm.
and they're able to get the flight number and just kind of know when they're going to land and take off, and so they can make sure to be there.
And Laura, seems like one of the big concerns that you heard from folks involves due process and just how quickly people can be moved out of Idaho after they've been detained. Why does where someone is physically located matter so much if an attorney is trying to help them?
Yeah, so if someone wants to challenge their detention, they pretty much have to file what's called a habeas corpus petition. And in order to get that, you have to file it with a court that has jurisdiction over where the detainee is. So if someone gets arrested and then they get detained, and maybe they're able, if they have a lawyer, that lawyer has to know where they are so that they can file in the correct court. So if you get, I talked to someone that said someone was detained in Idaho Falls on a Sunday, and then the next Tuesday they
Hmm.
were flown out. And so that's kind of quick. And if they get flown to, say, Tacoma, they'd have to file in a different court. And sometimes family members or attorneys don't know where their client is or where their family member is after they've been detained, because sometimes the flights can happen pretty quickly.
So I do understand there is another side to this. In fact, you talked with Republican State Representative Clint Holstetter, I believe, who said that these flights are simply immigration law being enforced. So what did he talk to you about in regards to those concerns being raised by these observers?
Yeah, his argument was basically like none of these laws are new. It's just the enforcement of them is more active now. And
Hmm.
he basically made the argument that this is, just enforcing our immigration laws, and that not doing so, he said, wouldn't be fair to people who immigrated here legally. So he said he understood that it could be unsettling, but that he was in support of just making sure we're enforcing our immigration laws to the fullest extent.
So finally, Laura, these flights have been happening, according to your reporting, twice a week since April. And these observers say they've documented more than 500 detainees being flown out. Do you have any idea where these folks are ultimately going and what happens to them after they leave Twin Falls?
Yeah, so talking to the people who've been tracking them, as well as a local immigration lawyer, a lot of them go to an airport south of Seattle, but probably from there ultimately go to it. There's a very large detention center in Tacoma, Washington. Some of them go to Salt Lake City, some of them go to Phoenix, and for the most part, people who are going to Phoenix have what's called a final order of removal, and those people usually are getting deported from the detention center in Phoenix. And
all right, thanks.
Yeah, but there's a number of these places kind of around the West that they could be taken. But Idaho doesn't have an immigration court. So that's part of the reason these folks are getting moved around, is if they are going to go before an immigration lawyer, we don't have one here. So they have to go somewhere else.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. Appreciate that reporting. Brian, the Trump administration is moving to eliminate a decades-old rule that protects millions of acres of national forest. Our state seems to be in a bit of an unusual position because we have roadless areas. And so though they will keep their protections because the state has its own laws. So can you begin by telling us exactly what this roadless rule is? Say that 3 times fast. And why Idaho won't be affected by the Trump administration eliminating the national version.
Yeah, so the roadless rule was enacted about 25 years ago, and it protects areas of National Forest Service land that don't have other sorts of designations like wilderness areas. That don't have a lot of road construction in them. These areas were inventoried. They're some of the wildest parts of national forest land that don't have other protections. And so the roadless rule, the national roadless rule, basically says it's complicated, but it limits very severely the amount of new road construction, the amount of motorized travel, and the amount of commercial logging that can be done in these areas.
You argue in your opinion piece that our state's approach could actually be a model for other states. What is it about how Idaho does this that you think has made the rule so durable?
So the reason that Idaho's rule is likely to survive, even if the Trump administration succeeds in revoking the national roadless rule, is because we have a state agreement. Idaho has a roadless rule committee made up of stakeholders from across the spectrum, including extractive industry, including also conservation groups, outdoor recreation groups, highway or motorized recreation groups. So there are a lot of stakeholders involved in any of these decisions. It's also got a little bit more flexibility to it. So there are some areas that have higher levels of protection than the roadless rule. There are sort of 5 categories. So there are some of these areas that have higher levels of protection and some that have lower levels of protection. And this was sort of negotiated out. The fact that there are all these stakeholders and that there's an agreement between the state and the federal government has meant that this rule will not be revoked and will continue to be in place even if the national rule is revoked. The reason that's important in the current context is that the Supreme Court, among other things, has, along with the efforts like DOJ early in the Trump administration, have really undermined the independence of federal agencies. Agencies like the Forest Service for a long time were managed basically with the directives of scientists, professional land managers, people like that. They've been politicized to a great degree by the Trump administration and are likely to continue to be more politicized. And that's why you see things like the wholesale wiping out of a rule that's been in place for 25 years that governs tens of millions of acres of national forest. So in a context where federal agencies are more likely to be political, are more likely to be whipsawed by presidential elections, having something that's a durable interstate compact is likely to be more stable and more reliable.
All right. Well, I appreciate all of that reporting. And if you want to read Brian's entire opinion piece, go to the Idaho Statesman and you will be able to do that. Big thank you to all of our panelists today. Brian Clark, Idaho Statesman opinion writer, Clark Corbin with the Idaho Capital Sun, and Laura Guido with the Idaho Capital Sun. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Make sure you check out our podcast feed because you can find more episodes of topics that might be interesting to you. And for more local news and headlines, make sure you subscribe to the Connector podcast. If this podcast has become a part of your routine, can you tap 5 stars and leave us a review? It helps us stand out.